A very good morning to everyone present here today. On behalf of the organizing committee of the 18th Annual National Conference of Association of Industrial Psychiatry of India, I, Dr. Sadaf Aziz, take great honor and delight in welcoming all our esteemed guests to the last day of this conference. We're extremely grateful for your presence with us today. Carl Jung once said, "One who looks outside dreams, one who looks inside awakens." On this note, we shall begin with today's first session, which is the free paper session. There will be 10 minutes allotted to each presentation. Every speaker will be given 8 minutes to finish their presentation, following which there will be a 2 minutes question and answer round. Questions to be asked can be put in the chat box during each presentation. Without further ado, I shall now take the privilege of inviting Dr. Samiksha Sahu as chairperson of this session. Dr. Samiksha Sahu, she's a gold medalist from Dr. D.Y. Patil Medical College, Pune. She's currently a senior resident in Department of Psychiatry, Gandhi Medical College, Bhopal. She was an ex-consultant psychiatrist at Bhopal Neuropsychiatric Clinic and Diagnostic Center. She was a recipient of Lakshmi Shanti Award for Best Research and Presentation by Female Member. She has special interest in child and adolescent psychiatry. She has multiple publications and presentations at national conferences. She's done 2 workshops at a national conference. She's done a certified course for de-addiction from NIMHANS. Shall we start with the session now, ma'am?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Our first speaker is Dr. Amrinderjeet Kaur. We'll be presenting your slides, ma'am.
Yes. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
May I have the permission to start, ma'am?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Today, I will be talking about the stigma in mental health. I will be covering my presentation under the following heads. Next slide, please. These will be the headings I will be covering. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The term stigma is derived from the Greek word stigma, which means tattooing or branding. Earlier, it was used as a visible mark, which was placed on the members of the tainted group, such as traitors or slaves. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. As per government, the stigma is a negative evaluation of a person as the tainted or the discredited on the basis of attributes such as mental disorder, ethnicity, drug misuse, or physical disability. Next slide, please. As per the historical perspectives, in the pre-modern times, families in India and the most parts of Asia, they took the people with mental illness to the faith healers. And during the colonial rule in Asia, mental asylums provided the shelter to the mentally ill people. And these mental asylums were located only outside the city limits. And the people with mental illness, they were confided only to the areas out in the outskirts of the city. Because there was devaluation and stigmatization of the people with mental illness, so the psychiatry units were established inside the community only, and the distinct psychiatry units were placed inside the community general hospitals. Next slide, please. Now, coming to the theories of stigma, we have 3 theories: social identity theory, theory of structural stigma, self-stigma. Now, coming to the social identity theory, it is a concept which was proposed by Goffman, and it considers how the people use the social constructs to judge the people, to judge or label someone who is different and disabled. Now, talking about the structural stigma. Next slide, please. It is the external evaluation of a person that is based upon the societal norms, and there is the presence of barriers which are created for the people of mental illness. There is a restriction in the right of people with mental illness to hold the elective offices, sit in the juries, and there is a restriction in the child custody rights only because of their illness. People with mental illness, however, they may be having much more education levels, much more degrees, but because of their mental illness, they are not given the rights to have the custody of their child or to sit in the juries. So now next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, talking about the self-stigma, it results from the experiences, perception, or the anticipation of the negative social reaction. Social reaction, which results from the internalization of shame, blame, and hopelessness, guilt, and fear of discrimination. Now, the process of stigma involves many stages, which involves two stages of cue, stereotypy, prejudice. Cue, stereotypy, prejudice, and discrimination. Now, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, the process I have already mentioned that it follows different stages like cue, stereotypy, prejudice, and discrimination. Now, the causes of stigma mainly involve the ignorance or the misconceptions, cultural factors, and the belief systems. Myths and beliefs that the illness is due to the curse from the gods, punishment for one's sins, witchcraft, black magic, demonic, or the spirit possession. The most common cause the people have in their mind is about the unknown outcome of the condition of the mental illness and the burden of care they have in their minds regarding the care of the mentally ill people. There is also the presence of, at times, there is the presence of inadequate facilities for the treatment. There is a lack of education and awareness in the general people, in the general public regarding the mental illness. Next slide, please. Now, talking about the prevalence of the causes of stigma with the mental health, there is a lack of awareness in the community, which amounts to around 97% of the causes of stigma. And regarding the nature of illness, it comes as a second factor, which leads, is associated with the stigma associated with the mental illnesses. Next slide, please. Now, talking about the types of stigma, we have many types, but mainly I will be talking about the three types: social stigma, self-stigma, and the caregiver stigma. Now, the people with mental illness, they are feared, rejected, and avoided by the society due to their own beliefs of danger and violence from the mentally ill people. Now, coming to the caregiver stigma, it occurs when the people... Next slide, please. Caregiver stigma. It occurs when the people who are associated there with the stigmatized individuals, such as caregivers, family members, and friends, who are personally affected by the public stigma. And the caregivers, they feel unhappy and helpless about their association with the stigmatized individual, as they suffer various emotional consequences like disrespect, disregard, fear, and they tend to conceal their familial association with the person who is mentally ill. Now, the scales of there are many scales for quantifying the stigma: internalized stigma of mental illness scale, discrimination and stigma scale, participation scale. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, main one is the internalized stigma scale of mental illness. It is a 29-item scale, which has got 5 subscales. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is a pro forma of the internalized stigma scale of mental illness. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Impact of the next slide, please. Impact of the stigma. There is a lack of employment opportunities for the people with the mental illness. The people with the mental illness are employers assume that the people with mental illness, they are more likely to be absent. They may be dangerous. They may be unpredictable. They may be having an unpredictable outcome of their behavior. So there are negative responses from the employer, and fellow employees maintain a social distancing from the people who have the mental illness. Next slide, please. Stigma is ranked around fourth among the barriers to receive the treatment. There are financial barriers which can make the access difficult to services. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. It also denies the people of opportunities. They get unsatisfactory housing, marriage prospects. They are also get worsens in the people with the mental illness. There is a fear of rejection by the neighbors. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The impact of stigma is that the patients will be having the reduced self-esteem. Now, how we can go about reducing the stigma? The first and the foremost comes in reducing the stigma is a treatment of the mental illness. Adequate treatment of the mental illness is the foremost in reducing the stigma. We should be educating people about the mental illnesses, and the campaigns and media should also play a role in spreading the awareness about the mental illness. Myths and facts about the mental illness should be made. Myths and facts which are there associated with the mental illness, they should be put forth to the students. Medical students should be imparted knowledge and information about the mental illness. And in our context, we should be firstly.
Ma'am, please wind up in the next 1 minute.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. So we will be as psychiatrists, we impart to the mentally ill people to decrease their self-stigma. We should be imparting the pharmacotherapy in the form of treating the mental illness adequately, and we should be giving the behavior therapy for reducing the cognitive distortion in the mentally ill people, so that their negative cognitive distortions, they are reduced, and giving them the positive hope of life, and giving the caregivers hope that their ward or their patient would be fine. So by imparting the knowledge to them. So and we can also see that many programs are being carried out there in the foreign countries also, in which people talk about the mental illness, and mentally ill people come together once in a week or once in a month, and they share their experiences. And we can also bring about the public personalities like Deepika Padukone has started a campaign against the stigma of mental illness, that she has gone through a phase of depression, and she came out successfully from this problem of depression. So these media personalities can also spread the notion that mental illness is treatable, and that all the people with mental illness cannot go on untreated, and they don't have to suffer throughout their life. I have completed, ma'am. I have finished, ma'am.
The session is open for discussion now. Ma'am, can you please unmute?
Okay. Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it was a nice presentation. However, I was expecting that you must have done some study, but it was not there. But tell me, what is your opinion about the stigma faced by the psychiatrist in comparison to other physicians?
Ma'am, there is the presence of stigma which is faced by the psychiatrist itself, ma'am. We should be telling our colleagues that the notion they have about psychiatrists is not like that which they have in their minds, ma'am. Ma'am, we can educate we can educate them regarding the mental illnesses we are going that we are treating, and that all the patients who are ill, they are not dangerous, they are not physically violent, and they are not only some number of people are there which who are violent. All the people are violent.
We'll move on to the next speaker now.
Okay, ma'am.
Next
you.
speaker is Dr. Akanksha Arya.
Shall we begin?
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, Akanksha.
My topic for today would be multidimensional scale of perceived social support, its translation and validation of the Marathi version. Next slide, please. Mental health disorders adversely affect the individual's daily functioning, ability to maintain social relationships, and decrease their quality of life. Social support is meaningful because it is essential for mental health as well as enhancing psychiatric patients' quality of life. The multidimensional scale of perceived social support is a brief research tool designed to measure perceptions of support from three sources: family, friends, and a significant another. The scale is comprised of a total of 12 items with four items for each subscale. Them being for special person, previous slide please. For special person, there is a four questions. There's a special person who is around when I am in need. There's a special person with whom I can share joy and sorrows. There's a special person who is a real source of comfort to me. There's a special person in my life who cares about my feelings. The question about family will be: my family really tries to help me. I get emotional help and support I need from my family. I can talk about my problems with my family, and my family is willing to help me make decisions. Previous slide, please. And to the friends, the question would be: my friends really try to help me. I can count on my friends when things go wrong. I have friends with whom I can share my joys and sorrows. I can talk about my problems with my friends. Previous slide, please. The questions go from very strongly disagree to very strongly agree, ranging from 1 to 7, minimum score being 1 and maximum 84. The aim of this study is to develop a Marathi version of multidimensional scale of perceived social support. The objectives are to develop a version of questionnaire in Marathi language to assess the perceived social support. Previous slide, please. To translate the Marathi questionnaire back to English to find the correlations between English and Marathi questionnaire. Next, please. Materials and methods. It is a cross-sectional study done in a tertiary care hospital and research center. Sample was 100 adult individuals. Inclusion criteria was people above 18 years of age. They should be bilingual, speaking English and Marathi, and willing to give consent for the study. Excluded were the people with intellectual disability, those individuals who are not able to give consent, and those having any other medical or psychiatric illness. The tools were a performer to inquire about demographic details, details of psychopathology, details of social support, and questions pertaining to aims and objectives of the study. The multidimensional scale of perceived social support, and the Marathi version of the same. Next, please. The results. Mean score of English and Marathi versions were 59.65 and 59.87 respectively. The scores were significantly correlated. Spearman's rho 0.983. Correlation is significant at the 0.001 level. The Marathi version had a Cronbach's alpha of a 0.820, split half with Spearman-Brown adjustment was 0.894. Gutman's lambda 2 was 0.834. Spearman-Brown coefficient equal length was 0.797. Next, please. These are the item total statistics collected from the study. Next, please. The total variance explained initial eigenvalues and expression sum of squared loading and rotation sum of the squared loadings. Next, please. These are the component matrix. Next, please. The factor analysis. To examine the factor structure of the FFSI, an exploratory factor analysis was performed. Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin measure of sampling adequacy was 0.794 and Bartlett's test of sphericity approximate was found to be 491.24. A principal components analysis with varimax rotation was performed on the FSFI responses of the participants, which yielded 3 factors with an eigenvalue greater than 1, representing 64.95% of the total variance. Thus, conclusion is this scale has shown to be a good internal and test-retest reliability, validity, and fairly stable factorial structure. Thus, it can be used to assess the social situation of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Kancha. We'll move on to the next speaker now. Our next speaker is Dr. Madhura Samudra.
Good morning, respected chairperson and all the delegates present here. Today, I'll be presenting a paper on the association of childhood psychological trauma with disordered eating behaviors and suicidal ideation in medical students. Next slide, please. Eating disorders are characterized by disturbances in feeding and eating behaviors that significantly interfere with the daily life of the individual. They are a complex, multifactorial convergence of biological, familial, psychosocial, and psychological variables with an increasing incidence in the Indian scenario. The psychopathology defining these conditions manifests with disordered eating behavior, disturbed thoughts, eating attitudes, and emotions. Eating disorders are spread across all demographic divides, affecting people of all ages, sex, race, and cultural backgrounds. The lifetime prevalence of anorexia nervosa ranges from 2 to 4% and bulimia around 2 to 6%. According to a study in eating disorders among medical students, there was significant prevalence of eating disorder symptoms and disordered eating attitudes and behaviors of 16.9%. Plenty of studies consider the possibility of childhood trauma, especially sexual abuse along with parental neglect, representing powerful antecedents to eating disorders. One study found that 45% of the patients with eating disorders had a history of sexual abuse and other forms of childhood psychological trauma. In another study, it was discovered that relative to a non-eating disordered comparison group, eating disordered men reported higher rates of being beaten in childhood, mother-child abuse, and sexual abuse. Research shows that childhood trauma leads to the development of eating psychopathology, defined as the psychological traits clinically relevant in individuals with eating disorders, anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Another study predicted that early childhood abuse and neglect results in dysfunctional emotional regulation, which leads to suicidality in the context of impoverished social environments. With insufficient research on eating disorders and the impact on the mental health in the Indian doctor population, this study was designed to bridge the gap. Next slide, please. The aim of my study was to study association of childhood psychological trauma with disordered eating behaviors and suicidal ideation in medical students. The objectives were to evaluate presence of emotional, physical, sexual psychological trauma and neglect in childhood with the childhood trauma questionnaire, to determine disordered eating behavior and cognition in medical students by applying the DEAS scale, to assess the presence of suicidal ideation with the use of positive and negative suicidal ideation inventory, to compare and correlate the association of childhood trauma with presence of eating disorders and suicidal ideas. The place of the study, this was a cross-sectional and analytical study which was performed in a tertiary care medical college and research center in a suburban area of India. Students who were studying in final MBBS and who were willing to participate in the study were included, and students with any past history of psychiatric disorders or those consuming any form of psychotropic medication were excluded from the study. By purpose of sampling, a group of 100 final year undergraduate students, out of which 57 were female and 43 were male, were included in the study with their informed consent. All the subjects fulfilling the above eligibility criteria were assessed by using following tools: a self-made questionnaire consisting of demographic details, eating habits with any history of substance use, childhood trauma questionnaire, which is a 28-item questionnaire divided into 6 subscales, the disordered eating attitude and behavior scale, which is a 25-item questionnaire grouped into 5 subscales, and the positive and negative suicide ideation inventory, which is a self-reported measurement consisting of 2 subscales. All the data collected was processed and Spearman's correlation coefficient was calculated. The level of significance was kept at p less than 0.05. Next slide, please. These are the results of my study. The age group of the students ranged from 21 to 27 years, and the mean age was 22.51. The average BMI of the medical students was calculated as 23.573. 67% of the participants in the normal range and 33% were in the overweight category. 47% participants reported to eat more when they were stressed and 7% when feeling low or depressed. High positive and negative suicidal ideation inventory scores, particularly the NSI scores, were seen in 8 students suggesting suicidal ideation, 75% of which were males. We noticed that all the students were falling in the overweight category, that is BMI more than 25. Their DEAS scores, the disordered eating attitude scores, were also more than 100, which were very high, suggestive of disordered eating attitudes. And there was prior history of childhood trauma in the form of emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or emotional neglect. Next slide, please. Can you press once more? According to the childhood trauma questionnaire, 25% students had history of emotional abuse, but 43% experienced psychological trauma in the form of emotional neglect. Only 2% reported to have history of sexual abuse during childhood. On comparison, incidence of emotional abuse and physical abuse was surprisingly higher in males than females, whereas emotional neglect was more commonly seen in females. 57% of the participants showed high scores in the disordered eating attitude scale, suggestive of pathological eating attitudes and cognition. A disruptive relationship with food and restrictive or compensatory practices were more commonly seen in female medical students. 29 out of 100 students had very high scores, more than 100 on the DEAS, out of which 62% had BMI of more than 25. By calculating the Spearman's correlation coefficient, the correlation of scores from the disordered eating attitude scale and the childhood trauma questionnaire showed significant results in the predisposition of eating disorders when history of emotional abuse, neglect, or sexual abuse was present during childhood. But no significant association of physical abuse or neglect during childhood was found in development of disordered eating behavior or cognition in adult life. So hereby I conclude that there was significant difference in eating attitudes in male and female medical students, with higher prevalence of disordered eating behaviors and relationship with food, concern about weight gain, and compensatory practices found in females more than males, without any major variation in their BMI. There was a positive correlation between presence of childhood psychological trauma, especially in the form of emotional or sexual abuse or neglect, with the development of eating disorder cognition in adulthood. A substantial relationship was found in association for suicidal ideation with high BMI and disordered eating attitudes with presence of history of childhood psychological trauma. Although the fast pace and stress of medical school has affected students' eating habits and their relationship with food, concerns about appearance and restrictive eating patterns were found to be higher in female medical students. There was a substantial association of childhood psychological trauma in form of emotional or sexual abuse with eating disorders and development of negative self-worth leading to suicidal ideation. Thank you.
Very nice presentation, Madhura. I think we can go ahead. I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Nishtha Gupta.
Good morning. I am today presenting the paper titled To Assess the Impact of COVID-19 on Mental Health of Healthcare Workers. Next slide, please. Pandemics are not just a medical phenomena, but affect individuals and society on many levels, leaving an impact on mental health of people, which is most pronounced on those in direct dealing with the patients or being in a hospital environment. The situation with COVID-19 is not any different. Since there is a paucity in studies about the impact on mental health of healthcare workers, the study was conducted to evaluate the same. Next slide, please. This study was aimed at assessing the impact on mental health of healthcare workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Prevalence of mental health problems has been documented in pandemics previously, but they are limited wherein the mental health of healthcare workers is actively involved. While the population was under lockdown, the healthcare workers around the globe were busy with the management of COVID-19 despite exposure associated with working in a hospital environment. The aim of the study was to assess the impact on mental health of healthcare workers during COVID-19. A web-based anonymous voluntary cross-sectional survey was conducted using Google Forms to assess the consequences of the pandemic on healthcare workers. The survey was conducted with 350 participants, which included nursing staff, interns, resident doctors, and practitioners from all clinical and paraclinical departments. The study compares the impact on healthcare workers. DAS-21 is used as a standard scale, and a questionnaire was created keeping in mind the specific difficulties faced during the pandemic. The self-made questionnaire compares the prevalence of depression, anxiety, stress, and coping skills used to overcome the same during the initial phase of the pandemic when most areas were under lockdown. Next. The collected data from the questionnaire and DAS-21 was analyzed using chi-square, Fisher's test, and Mann-Whitney's test between the two sexes. Multivariable regression was used to adjust for the priorly defined confounders of age, sex, ethnicity, marital status, presence of comorbid conditions, and survey completion date. The primary outcome was the prevalence of depression, stress, and anxiety among all healthcare workers. The secondary outcomes were comparison of the prevalence of depression, anxiety, and stress, and mean DAS-21 and self-questionnaire scores between male and female co-workers. The results. Both men and women were equally affected in terms of low mood, with easy fatigability and mental exhaustion. Around 71% men and 75.9% women complained of low mood and easy fatigability, while most of them complained of mental exhaustion. While there was a decreased motivation to work among 97% women with a feeling of helplessness in about 68% females, pointing towards higher rates of depression among them. On the other hand, 57% men experienced low mood during that period. Both sexes were equally affected by the media, that is around 91% in total. Next slide. It was observed that the prevalence of smoking was increased in both with a higher percentage in males, and so was increased alcohol consumption in males, being more by 13.6% as compared to females. The sleeping pattern and appetite were equally affected in both sexes significantly. The sleeping patterns were altered in 76.8% of total subjects, while 70% complained of a change in eating habits. Here are the scores where we can see that the lack of knowledge about protection and prevention from the infection and feeling of being protected by the hospital created stress, which was significantly more in males. Also, we see that anxiety about being infected or infecting a family member or the family members being infected was significantly higher in males, while the depression was feeling of helplessness and of impending doom was significantly more in females. We can also see that the sex drive was altered and alcohol consumption was increased for both males and females, while it was significantly more in males. Next slide, please. Here we see a comparison of the data where we see that anxiety levels were high in both males and females significantly, while the males were higher than females. Next slide, please. This is a chart of the scoring of DAS21, where we see that depression, anxiety, and stress were all significantly higher than the previous times in both males and females. Next slide, please. In the univariable analysis, doctors working in emergency and those directly in contact with COVID suspects and positive cases were more likely to be depressed, as this group is more exposed and hence anxious. Moreover, the prevalence of depression was found to be more in females. There was no significant difference in the frequency of anxiety or depression among trainees and consultants, yet a moderate to less knowledge score was more likely to be associated with anxiety or depression. Fear of being unprotected was another factor associated with anxiety or depression in the univariate analysis, which is plausible. Experience from our department so far indicates that willingness of staff to work has not been really affected, in line with reports from previous pandemics. Despite the initial shock, the healthcare professionals appear to exhibit high levels of commitment and professionalism. Our impression is that the increasing knowledge about preventing and dealing with the disease and the development of more specific procedural and treatment protocols alongside educational activities will contribute to improving the morale of healthcare workers dealing with the pandemic. Excluding observational studies, 3 papers, all from Chinese centers, have addressed this topic. Coping strategies are of 2 kinds: problem-solving strategies and emotion-reducing strategies. Coping strategies are generally useful for reducing the problem or lessening the emotional reaction to it. It was observed in the study that maladaptive coping strategies was used by a considerable part of the study group. As the number of patients affected by this pandemic continues to increase, the psychiatric profession, particularly in Asian countries, faces both a challenge and an opportunity. Strategies should be developed to offer the hope of providing mental health services in an easily accessible manner without any increase in infection risk. Though there are few large-scale observational studies available in this field to date, it is clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has led to a vigorous and multifaceted response from psychiatrists and allied professionals, and that mental health is clearly being taken into consideration at multiple levels in the general population, among healthcare workers, and in vulnerable populations. The limitations of the study. Poorly chosen distribution channels can lead to biased data and low response rates. Participants are less likely to stay fully engaged for a survey for more than 8 to 10 minutes than with other research methods. Unless an identification verification tool is used, it is impossible to know if the sample providing answers is the right person or if one person is submitting multiple responses. And lack of quality random sampling leads to questionable statistical confidence and margin of error. Conclusion. The mental health of doctors was adversely affected during the COVID-19 pandemic. While various studies were conducting to study the impact of COVID-19 on mental health of general population, the impact on mental health of healthcare workers has not been well established. This study compares the impact on healthcare workers. It was observed that stress was equally present in both sexes, while depression and irritability was more in females. The faulty coping skills like increased substance abuse was more in males. There was disturbance in sleep in both sexes, while the burden of changed quality and quantity of work has led to slight hesitation to work in both sexes. In the COVID-19 pandemic, frontline healthcare workers are having to work under particularly intense stress levels. This puts those healthcare workers at enormous risk of stress-related symptoms and even persisting adjustment-related problems. Providing appropriate mental health support through media or multidisciplinary teams, including mental health professionals, is vital. During this pandemic, as in everyday life, there is no health without mental health. Next slide, please. The pressure to act timely and to successfully diagnose, isolate, and treat has been overwhelming, especially amid intense public and media scrutiny. This is in concordance with experience in other countries. In addition, due to the increased risk of exposure to the virus, our frontline doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers fear that they may contract COVID-19 themselves. They worry about bringing the virus home and passing it on to the loved ones and family members. Doctors are often reluctant to take the formal support that is available to them, but awareness should be created as professional help is extremely important in such crucial times. Thank you.
I have a question, Nisha. What was the self-made questionnaire you used?
Ma'am, the self-made questionnaire had 21 questions, and that has not been uploaded in the PPT itself, but it had several questions that were very simple, like, are you having feelings of impending doom? Are you having feelings of helplessness? Or do you worry that you will carry infection home? And where do you worry the most? And that was understandable by doctors of all fields and nurses and interns. So it was
And
made.
have you got it, like, how was the validation done about that scale?
Ma'am, we have put it up for validation. So we have just compared the study with DAS 21. So we had certain questions that included the ICD 11 and 10 criteria for depression, anxiety, and we had added 3-4 questions for coping strategies. So we had just compared that how relevant is our data as compared to the DAS 21 data.
No. All right. We'll move on to the next.
Our next speaker is Dr. Sanat Dhameja.
Good morning. Today, I would be presenting a research study based on smartphone addiction in medical college students. Next slide, please. Smartphones and the easy accessibility of the internet they provide have revolutionized our lives immensely. Individuals now can communicate with others using multiple apps and stay up to date with the ever-increasing information through search engines. Given the multifaceted applications of a smartphone, it has become an intrinsic part of the lives of nearly 33.4% of the Indian population who use a smartphone. Despite the technological advantage these devices offer, the growing evidence suggests their debilitating effect on physical and mental health. Next slide, please. The aim of the study was to study the prevalence of smartphone addiction, sleep disturbance, and low self-esteem in medical college students. The objectives including the evaluation of prevalence of smartphone addiction among medical students, to assess the correlates of smartphone addiction, to evaluate the self-esteem and well-being of students in correlation with smartphone use, to assess sleep quality in correlation with smartphone use. The methods that we used, it was a cross-sectional and analytical study carried out in a tertiary care hospital and research center with a clearance that was obtained from the Institutional Ethical Committee. Informed consent was taken and 500 medical students were included in the study. Only students who had been using smartphones for at least 6 months prior to the study were included. A social demographic questionnaire developed by the investigators based on the literature in order to collect data was used. Smartphone addiction scale, which is short form, was used. It is a self-report scale to evaluate the risk of smartphone addiction among adolescents. It's a 6-point Likert scale consisting of 10 items to which the responses range from I strongly disagree, scored as 1, to I strongly agree, scored at 6. Rosenberg self-esteem scale, a 10-item scale measuring global self-worth by measuring both positive and negative feelings about the self. All the items are answered using a 4-point Likert scale format, which ranges from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Assessment, a 9-item self-report scale measuring quality and patterns of sleep was used. The results, there was smartphone addiction found in 260 out of 500 of the total sample size, which is 52%. Low self-esteem among those 260 was there in 82 participants. Sleep disturbance observed in 180 of them. Total lack of self-esteem in the entire sample was in 150 participants, and total sleep disturbance in the entire sample found was in 250 participants out of 260. Next slide, please. With this, we can see the prevalence of low self-esteem and sleep disturbance in these medical students who had smartphone addiction and the ones without smartphone addiction. So medical undergraduates who had smartphone addiction also had a significant amount of sleep disturbance, 69.23%, whereas the ones without the smartphone addiction had it at 29.17%. However, the low self-esteem in the study population was not significant. Next slide, please. To conclude, 52% was the prevalence of smartphone addiction among medical students. How to assess smartphone addiction? A score more than 31 is the cutoff for addiction for men and more than 33 is for women. Those falling between 22 to 32 are at a risk of addiction in the smartphone addiction scale. The Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index score more than 5 indicates poor sleep quality index. There's significant association between the smartphone addiction and sleep disturbance at 69.3% of those addicted are having sleep disturbance. Measures can be used in the college campus to reduce usage during college hours. Sleep hygiene techniques need to be taught, as well as usage during night hours should be monitored and limited to begin with. Thank you.
Sana, I have a question. What was your exclusion criteria?
Ma'am, exclusion criteria were the people who were not using the smartphone 6 months prior to the study, or who had not, who do not possess a smartphone, and those who already have other disorders that cause sleep disturbance or low self-esteem among them, already having anxiety or depressive disorders. Those were not included in the study.
And what about the people who are abusing substances?
Ma'am, that was not used as that was included only.
All right, we'll go ahead.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Nishtha Gupta.
Good morning. I'm presenting the neuropsychiatric involvement in SLE, a case series. Patients with systemic lupus erythematosus that suffer from one or more of several neuropsychiatric symptoms represent a subcategory named neuropsychiatric lupus, that is NPSLE. Cohorts of SLE patients suggest that nearly half will suffer from NPSLE during their disease course. The definition of NPSLE is a tough challenge owing to the broad spectrum of neuropsychiatric symptoms that it encompasses, most of which are non-specific. Symptoms of neuropsychiatric systemic lupus erythematosus may range from mild diffuse ones to acute life-threatening events, although the underlying mechanisms are still largely unraveled. Several pathogenic pathways are identified, such as antibody-mediated neurotoxicity, vasculopathy due to antiphospholipid antibodies, and other mechanisms like cytokine-induced neurotoxicity. The development of NPSLE in a specific individual depends on the genetic, environmental, and hormonal factors as well. Despite decades of research, our understanding of NPSLE remains limited. However, several pathogenic pathways were identified and linked to specific clinical manifestations, as previously mentioned, such as antibody-mediated neurotoxicity, vasculopathy due to antiphospholipid antibodies, and other mechanisms. And there might also be loss of neuroplasticity. Here we can see the proposed pathogenesis of neuropsychiatric lupus. Autoantibodies enter the brain, causing neuronal damage, including impaired neuroplasticity and synaptic transition. In order to reach the brain, the blood-brain barrier must be transiently breached by the external or internal factors. The vascular injury can be antibody-mediated by APL antibodies or via accelerated classical atherosclerosis. The ACR definition of NPSLE requires the satisfaction of each of 4 categorical criteria: the presence of delusions and or hallucinations without insight, the presence of functional impairment as a consequence, the absence of delirium, and absence of any secondary causes or primarily associated with psychosis, such as concomitant neurological damage or schizophrenia. Next slide, please. The first case was of a 20-year-old female who was a known case of NPSLE previously, who presented in a catatonic state with mutism, waxy-flexibility, negativism, psychological pillow posturing, and was on tablet lorazepam 1 mg and olanzapine 2.5 mg along with haloperidol 2.5 mg at night when she presented to us. All these medications were stopped and she was started on lorazepam 2 mg every 8 hourly and on SOS basis, which was given IV. Upon further interviews, her catatonia resolved. She was communicative but had reduced psychomotor activity. Lorazepam was then tapered and stopped. Her speech was spontaneous but considerably reduced in rate, tone, and volume, with distressed and anxious affect, delusions of persecution and reference, and third-person auditory hallucinations, with pervasive low mood and disturbed sleep, and she had stopped eating. Next slide, please. And in an old CVA was seen in the right cerebral hemisphere. Her CRP, D-dimer, homocysteine, serum ferritin, and fibrinogen levels were markedly increased. These were the values. The MRI showed small areas of restricted diffusion in pons on left and midbrain, likely to represent late acute infarcts. In view of all these symptoms mentioned earlier, tablet quetiapine was started at 25 milligrams at night, and on further interviews, it was gradually increased to 75 milligrams along with chemotherapy, and she was following every fortnight regimen of chemotherapy. Her sleep gradually improved, and she was taught relaxation techniques to combat the anxiety associated with her illness. Over a period of 1 month, her delusions resolved completely, while the hallucinations were still present, though they were very faint and elementary. She is being given supportive psychotherapy along with 75 milligrams of quetiapine at night currently, and she has currently improved. The second case was of a 29-year-old female, known case of SLE with query a flare, who came to the emergency department agitated and irritable, with complaints as given by the relatives of fearfulness, suspiciousness, muttering and smiling to self. She had a guarded affect and had a refusal to accept medicines. The MRI showed gliosis in left temporal lobe with flare hyperintensity within left amygdala, query post-seizure transient abnormality or sclerosis. The CT thorax is also attached along with. The chemotherapy was resumed for her, and she improved on the same with regular cyclophosphamide pulsed with methylprednisolone with no psychotic features by the end of the month. On regular interviews, we found that the psychotic features resolved with the chemotherapy, and we had not added any antipsychotic for her. Psychotherapy for mood features was done, and repeated evaluations have shown near total improvement in her. The third case was of a 30-year-old lady who was married, admitted with an SLE flare with fever, rash, and icterus. She was also a known case of SLE. She also complained of low mood, decreased interest in routine activities, and easy fatigability. Her biofunctions were disturbed, decreased sleep and appetite since past 3 months. Gradually, she became withdrawn and was often seen muttering to self. She was then taken to a psychiatrist and was started on tablet haloperidol 5 milligrams at night. When she came to the emergency department, she was off medication since past 10 days. On evaluation, she had delusions of persecution and reference with elementary hallucinations. She was restarted on tablet haloperidol, which was gradually up-titrated to 10 milligrams, and she was also started on chemotherapy, and her symptoms also resolved within 20 days. Next slide, please. Discussion. The most frequent NPSLE manifestations are seizures, generalized or focal, which may develop in 10 to 20% of SLE patients, and they tend to occur early in its course. Clinical evidence of demyelination in NPSLE is reported in approximately 0.3% of cases. Demyelination is one of the most poorly understood and studied NPSLE symptoms and can be a clinically isolated symptom, may overlap with another CNS demyelinating syndrome, or may be related to drugs, and in some cases, the diagnosis can be made only after a longer follow-up. Chorea is the most common movement disorder in SLE and appears in 2 to 3% of the patients, and even in a higher percentage in children, while Parkinsonism, ataxia, and hemiplegismus are relatively rare. Chorea usually presents during the first years of SLE and is accompanied by antiphospholipid antibodies in up to 92% of cases. Cognitive impairment is highly prevalent among lupus, ranging from 20 to 80%. Depression is the most common mood disorder in NPSLE, and its lifetime prevalence may reach 65%. A recent study concluded that depression in SLE is linked to several factors, of which the usage of high-dose prednisone was found to be the most significant independent factor. An association of depression and specific antibodies directed at ribosomal P, NMDA receptor, and other neuronal epitopes have been suggested. Anxiety disorders are also common and can affect 40% of the patients. Organic psychosis can affect 2 to 11% of SLE patients. In approximately 60% of these, it tends to be the presenting SLE symptom. SLE psychosis usually correlates with SLE activity and responds to immunosuppressive therapy. The differential diagnosis is corticosteroid-induced psychosis, and its prevalence in SLE was not found to be higher than in other autoimmune diseases. The diagnosis of NP-SLE may resemble the assembly of a puzzle. The clinician should first diagnose SLE, then exclude non-SLE intercurrent illnesses, medication side effects, and psychosocial or functional related conditions, which was done in these cases mentioned above, and the treatment decided accordingly. It is important to note that the manifestations of NP-SLE might overlap the neuropsychiatric manifestations of other autoimmune diseases. Autoantibodies are central for the diagnosis of SLE, and medications for them were started after obtaining the reports for the same. Anti-ribosomal P antibodies are more prevalent in depression or psychosis. Anti-neuronal and with cognitive dysfunction and depression. Anti-ganglioside antibodies are mostly associated with migraine, acute confusional state, depression, and peripheral neuropathy. In case 1 mentioned above, anti-ribosomal P antibodies were found positive, and they could not be assessed in the other 2 cases due to financial constraints. Next slide, please. Conclusion. Neuropsychiatric symptoms affect nearly half of the patients with systemic lupus erythematosus. However, the effect on disease severity, quality of life, and prognosis is tremendous. Symptoms of neuropsychiatric SLE may range from mild diffuse ones to acute life-threatening events. Although the underlying mechanisms are still largely unraveled, several pathogenic pathways are identified. For systemic areas, corticosteroids are still the mainstay of treatment. For manifestations of severe central nervous system involvement, intravenous pulse cyclophosphamide has become an effective treatment used both singly and in combination with therapies, as methylprednisone, which was used in all 3 of our cases. Combination pulse cyclophosphamide with pulse methylprednisolone for severe or refractory neuropsychiatric lupus, while haloperidol with second-generation antipsychotics have been found to be effective in most cases of psychosis. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishta. It was an interesting collection of cases. Well done. I think we can proceed further or whatever is planned.
Ma'am, now we'll have a short break of 5 minutes.
All right.
Dr. Swati will begin your presentation at exactly 10:30 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.